grieving. Some families will be lost to one another forever. To those of you who face the difficulties of reconnecting with family and establishing ongoing relationships, we say sorry. We offer this apology in the hope that it will assist your healing and in order to shine a light on a dark period of our nation's history. To those who have fought for the truth to be heard, we hear you now.
You're listening to Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption. I'm one of your hosts, Jo Sparrow. This podcast is a production of Jigsaw Queensland Post-Adoption Support Service. However, the views expressed are those of the people participating, not necessarily Jigsaw Queensland. The podcast discusses adult themes and listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, it's Jo Sparrow here. I'm the president of Jigsaw Queensland and the host of Adopt Perspective. Today's guest is a Canadian-born adoptee who has lived in Australia for more than 2 decades. I first had the pleasure of meeting Angela Irving at a workshop I facilitated in Perth for Jigsaw WA back in 2018. Seems like 100 years ago now. And her story has changed so much since then. Today, she's going to share how the internet and DNA have helped her solve an international mystery and connect with her maternal and paternal families, even during a pandemic. Welcome to Adopt Perspective, Angela. I'm so happy to have you join us.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Angela, could we start just straight out of the gates? I might just ask you to share with us what it was like for you to grow up adopted.
Yeah, I am one of the very lucky ones. I had a beautiful journey of being adopted. My mom and dad were always open and honest with me, so that I do not ever remember a time of not knowing that I was adopted. And they had crafted a beautiful story around it that I was an angel. And that's why they called me Angela. And I was their beautiful little girl. You know, they were a couple that fell in love at first sight. And sadly, my mom had suffered a few miscarriages, so they weren't able to fall pregnant naturally. And after fostering a number of children, they were gifted a baby, which was me. So I was a very treasured child.
Yeah. And did you always know that you were adopted?
Yeah, so I always knew I was adopted. I don't remember a time of not knowing. And I'm a pretty outgoing person. I have been since the day I was born. And I would tell everyone my story. Like I used to go around as a little girl and tell everyone about how my mommy couldn't take care of me, but a new mom and daddy came along, and that was my mom and dad. And yeah, I was always very open about it, which I think has now at 45 years old, when I look back at that was probably one of the reasons why I've been fairly okay with it.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask, were you an only child or?
Yeah, so I was an only child, so my parents never adopted any other children, and they were I think they would have, but my mom had some health issues and didn't work. So we were a one income family. And so I got to be a lonely only.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm just kind of curious, like when I was growing up, once I kind of understood adoption, I was searching all the time, you know, in crowds, and I was really desperate and felt very stymied that I couldn't find my mother. How did you think about it much? Was it something you thought about or?
Yeah, so I always was searching. So even though I had an amazing mom and dad, I was always searching for my mom. Not necessarily so much my dad, but I was always searching for my mom. And I was always wondering whether I had brothers and sisters out there. So mainly I thought about, do I have a sister? I was never really like, oh, do I have any brothers? I don't know whether that's just because I'm female, but those were sort of the two things that I pined for, but I mostly wanted to find, my mom.
Yeah, that's quite usual for adopted people to first only be thinking of the mother and then later the father. Yeah.
Well, we're so connected, like, you know, because our mothers give birth to us, which is so incredible. And I grew up Catholic, and my parents were very much pro-life, and so I grew up being very appreciative that my mom gave birth to me, because she could have made a different choice, you know. So I'm pro-choice myself, but I grew up in a very pro-life family. Yeah.
Yeah. So what then led you to search for your mother, and when did you start like actively searching?
So I have memories of being an early teenager and going to the library, and I had bits and pieces of information. Like I knew that I was born at a particular hospital and that I'd lived in a particular area in Ontario, Canada. So I would search through the records, the newspaper records in the library for any type of clues that I could find. I then when I turned 18, I was able to apply for what we call the non-identifying information. And back then, the records weren't open in Canada. So that was the first thing that you had to apply for. And I remember the day when that parcel arrived in the mail, and I received a book. It was burgundy. It had a cutout with my name on it, Angela McSevenies. That was my maiden name's background history. And I remember opening it up, and there was probably maybe about 8 pages of, typed information in there. And that was the very first time I learned about my story prior to being given to my mom and dad. Yeah. And so that's when I got my next clue on what the possible formation was of my mom's family. I knew that my grandmother had passed away 2 years prior to my birth, that my mom had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, and that my grandfather had moved on from the home and started a new family. So I had some clues, nothing that identified them, so no names or anything like that, but it gave me a clue into the family structure.
Yeah, so that's a lot more information than, I got back in 71. Do you mind if I ask about what year you were adopted in?
77.
77, yeah. So a few years on, yeah. Because I have family members who were adopted around 1980, and they got so much more information here in Australia than what I did back then.
Yeah. So that was from the Children's Aid Society in Canada. So they're the ones that produced that booklet for me. Yeah. And so I had, if we go back a few steps, when my dad was in the social worker's office at the time, they always told me this story about how the lady had left the room and my dad had shuffled through the papers, and on the back of my adoption order was a name, and it said Vicky Ann Abbott. And that wasn't my mom's name whatsoever, but I'm not sure where he had pulled that from. So for years, I thought that was my mom's name. So I searched every different variation of that possible.
Total red herring.
Yeah. It was a total red herring in the search. So years went by of me knowing that name and searching those things in the newspapers. I turn 18 and get my non-identifying information. So then the search kind of changed a little bit, but I always had that surname in the back of my mind. And then I got older, I went traveling, and my search probably slowed down between the ages of 24 and let's say 35. So that decade of, I moved to Australia and I met my now husband and bought my first house and started a career and all that, some fun stuff. And then I reconnected with a woman who ran an organization called Parent Finders, who I grew up with and I worked in the local bulk food store. So we reconnected through Facebook. And she was the one that suggested that I join a group on Facebook called DNA Detectives. And it's a huge group of people that are looking for their family, and they're using DNA to try and track them down. So I joined the Facebook group to start off with, and the stories that you can read through there are on the spectrum, right? It's a gradient from positive reconnections or reunions to the not positive reunions, And so I thought, okay, right, well, let's give this a go. And I I sent off for the DNA kit through ancestry.com, and then got my results back.
So what year would that have been, do you think?
So I was researching this. So that would have been in late 2018.
Okay, so it was getting quite underway, Ancestry, by then.
Yeah. So I got my results back, and I knew nothing about DNA. And if anyone's ever listening has done that, you'll realize that you get thousands and thousands and thousands of results for low connections on the centimorgans. So that's how you measure DNA. And so I had a couple higher connections, like nothing earth-shattering, but about 150 to 250 centimorgans. So I just started reaching out to those people with my story. I had my background history scanned, and I would send it to them and see whether I put any of the dots together. And I had blue eyes and blonde hair and tan skin. So I had a feeling that I could have a Dutch history, and the ancestry had confirmed that. And I had matched with all these people with Dutch names. But I also matched with a lot of people from the English side as well. And so I just started tracing back and building out these trees. Once you become in this group, there are these people that call them search angels that will help you understand how DNA works. And I just started piecing those pieces together, and I built out a few different trees of people who I thought I could be related to. And one day it just all came together, and I found the obituary of my grandmother, and I looked at her family configuration, and she had 3 girls and 2 boys, and they were from the area that I was born in. And I was like, wow, I've worked it out. I didn't know which of the sisters could be my mom, but I knew that I thought that she was the oldest, the way I interpreted the non-identifying information. And then I just went from there. And I managed to find a lady on Facebook, and I reached out to her, and she was my aunt. And sadly,
right, I'm going to stop you for a second before we go too much further. And everyone listening is going, stop it, let it go.
Sorry.
I was going to back up for 1 second and just talk to people about the Canadian access laws and that kind of thing, because it was actually really interesting. I did a little bit of research this morning before we spoke again, and you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, but what a complicated country, because most of the provinces and territories have laws originally based in British common law, but Quebec's law is based on the Civil Code of France. And just like Australia, the different provinces legislate adoption, like our states do. And as far as my very quick search could decipher, the current status of records access for adult adoptees in Canada is varied, with some provinces offering very little information. Some have mutual disclosure registries. Some have access rights that are subject to vetoes. So while I wouldn't stake my house on my information being current, what did you discover when you were looking into it as well?
Yeah, so when I started looking into when those laws changed, because I always monitored what was happening with those laws, because after I got my non-identifying information, I put my name on the register to be found, and nothing ever came of it. And when the laws changed, I printed out the paperwork, and I was about to send it off, and I just went, too hard basket. So because I'd already moved to Australia then, and so it just seemed like it was so far, like the administration of it was just daunting for me. So I never actioned it. Yeah.
And that's the case for a lot of people, even if they're adopted in Australia, that, a parent might have moved overseas, or you might have moved overseas, and it just complicates things. It's already quite sometimes complicated and frustrating process, let alone with those added complexities, I guess.
Most definitely.
Right, now let's go forward again. You've discovered an aunt.
I've found an aunt. Yeah. So I sent a message, and when you're an adoptee reaching out to people, you try and keep it not too heavy, right? So I'm like, hi, I think we might be related, so on and so forth.
Is this on Facebook? You've reached
on Facebook
out?
Messenger?
Okay. Yeah.
and it never got read, so it just sat there in an unread. She's not a person that participates in that social media medium very often,
And
so it
sometimes they
was,
can be hidden too, can't they? Because you're not friends, so sometimes
yeah,
people just don't even see the message.
exactly, yeah. So it was months and months and months and months until she read the message and replied. And I had, continued going down different routes trying to find the others that were related. So my other aunt and my mom and my two uncles. By this point in time, I've worked out that my mom had passed away. So this was in the November, and my mom had passed away in the March. So reaching out to my aunt was it was the next best option.
All right, I'm going to pause you again.
Yeah.
So not only has your aunt not responded, which sometimes as adopted people, even though there can be some very legitimate reasons why they haven't, can be quite,
Yeah.
oh, goodness, they don't want to talk to me. And you've also discovered that your mum has passed away.
Yeah. Yeah. So I
What
found my
did,
mom's obituary.
so how did that feel? How did you process
Um,
that?
Yeah, well, I was disappointed. So I
Yeah.
lost my adopted mom when I was 30,
Yeah.
and my father had already passed away as well. So
Yeah.
I've always had a running joke, and I don't know whether it's me just brushing over things, but I'm like, it made me an orphan again. So I was open to finding a new family.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, when I found out that my mom had passed away, I felt sad because I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for giving birth to me. Like that's what I've always wanted to tell her. And I know that a lot of people who I've met that are adopted, they want to thank their moms for giving them a chance at life. And so I was probably most saddened that I didn't get that opportunity to say thank you.
Yeah.
No, gosh.
I was just curious. I mean, it's like you just kind of went over it so fast, and I think that's actually really big discoveries that you made there.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
huge discovery. Yeah. So when I finally connected with my auntie and I sent her the non-identifying information that I had received.
Is this the second aunt or the first one that you contacted?
This is the first aunt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, she was distressed when we connected,
Yeah.
but in a loving way, like not in a not loving way, only because she had lost her sister recently, and my poor mom had suffered from mental health issues from an incident that she had when she was a teenager, and never remarried and never had any more children, and had lived on her own, and had looked for me her entire life since giving me up. And so, my auntie was there through the pregnancy, and, my mom wanted to keep me up until the final weeks before she was given birth. And the family at that point in time was in a really tough spot, and it just wasn't, she couldn't keep me. I mean, she could have, of course, it was her choice, but she made the best decision for me. So, yeah, it was a big reunion for her because, yeah, my mom never got to meet me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've had a FaceTime, and we've chatted, and it's just like meeting any stranger online. Just because it's your aunt doesn't mean you're going to have an immediate connection, but we had a great conversation, and we've messaged back and forth. I've never spoke to my other auntie. There was but my other aunt passes all the information forward. I've connected with all my first cousins on Facebook, so we're friends and get to see a little look into each other's eyes. But I think when you live on the other side of the world and you haven't had that face-to-face connection yet, it is difficult to build those relationships.
Yeah. So that's on the cards for the future, a face-to-face connection, do you think? Or oops, I just lost you're muted, Angela. Sorry. There we go. Oops. Did you mute it again? What's happened? Still muted.
Unmute.
There you go. You're back.
There we go. All right.
Sorry,
so
yes.
The question was, so when I go back to Canada, I'll certainly be putting the offer out there for people. If they want to connect and meet, I would love to take that next step. But it just depends if everyone's comfortable with that or interested, you know? Yeah.
Well,
so that all unfolded.
Yeah. Your grandparents, have they passed or?
Yeah, they had passed. So my grandfather passed in the early 90s, and my grandma had passed 2 years before my birth. So it was the 70s, and there was I think it was a very difficult time for the family. So they made the best choice for me.
So when did all of this contact happen?
So that was I went through my records last night. So that was in 2019. So just before the pandemic. Wow. So once I had found my mom and sort of went through that, I've uncracked that mystery, the next wave came through because I did know that I had a half sister. So it came through in my non-identifying information, which I hadn't mentioned before, because I was the result of a one-night stand. So my mom and dad had met at a party, and, I'm sure they must have fancied each other. And next thing you know, I'm created. And so I turned my attention to finding my biological father. Now, he had never been told that my mom was pregnant. So he had no idea that I existed and that she had given birth. So it was a bit of a needle in the haystack because I didn't really have much information about him other than I had a sister that was probably 4 years older than me, and that he was married at the time. So I learned a lot about DNA because you've got your maternal DNA, you've got paternal DNA, and I started working out how to differentiate between the connections. And it was pretty obvious because most people on the English surnames were on my maternal side, and the Dutch side was my paternal side. And then one day I was sitting at work in my office, and a notification came up on my mobile from ancestry.com that someone had reached out to me with a message. So I opened it up, and it was a first cousin. Now at that time I didn't know it was a first cousin because you can match with a first cousin as a half sibling or a first cousin because you have a similar amount of DNA.
And sometimes it can be low. I have a first cousin who's got an extremely low match to me, but I know they're a first cousin.
Yeah.
So
wow.
I wouldn't have picked it up. It comes up as like second cousin. So
yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So she messages me because she has recently gone through the experience of finding some half siblings because her father had sired some children outside of their family, and they had come to the surface. And so she thought she'd put her DNA on ancestry.com just in case anyone else was looking for answers, and we matched. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. Here's my background information, sent her the document, and she's like, oh no, you're not my sister, you're not my father's daughter. She goes, but you're my uncle's daughter for sure. And then within 5 minutes of this conversation, that might be an over-exaggeration, let's call it a couple hours, we're conversing back and forth. She just puts me into a Facebook Messenger conversation with my father. And she's like, Bill, I've found your daughter. Oh, I shouldn't say that.
That's fine. It's fairly nondescript identifier.
Yeah.
Did she ask you before she did that?
Yeah.
Okay,
she was like, oh,
it'd be a bit of a surprise if you're suddenly in this group going, whoa.
Considering you didn't know I existed.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I felt for him, and I feel for every man that, because women will never have that experience, right? But men can certainly have that experience where that women could have fallen pregnant and they've never been told about it, I mean, I think it's less likely maybe in modern day, but certainly from that 70s, 60s, 70s era, why not? Yeah.
Yes, it did happen a lot. Yeah.
It did, yeah. And so, and he was just super open. He was just like, wow, hi, how are you? Like, happened with your life? And, he's like, sorry, I don't remember who your mom might be. And so I took him on all the information I had and sent him my non-identifying background information. And he goes, oh, yeah, no, I remember now. And that was that. And so the relationship carried on for about a year. So that was in 2021 that I connected with my father. And, we went back and forth and had, lots of just very surface level conversations. And I asked about my siblings a few times, but he just wasn't in the space to be able to sort of bring us all together as a family. So in this time of speaking with my father, I had connected with his brother, my uncle, and his wife, my aunt. And they were sort of on the sidelines coaching me and working with me on helping to build my relationship. And so I reached out to my aunt about 12 months later, and I was like, listen, it's been 12 months and I just don't think that it's going to happen where I get to connect with my siblings. I was like, I don't want to disrupt anyone's life. That's not what I'm here for, but I would love to connect with my sister. Like, I've been thinking about her for the last 12 months and I just feel like it's time. And so she's like, yeah, no, she goes, leave it with me. Let me see what I can do. And, there's always, I suppose, a person in the family that takes control of that sort of thing. And so she negotiated in the labyrinth of the family and was able to get me introduced to my half sister, which was amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. And so since then, I've also connected with one of my half brothers and had, jumped on an Easter phone call. My sister's mom has participated in those Easter phone calls and has welcomed me into the family. And so I'm so excited to be able to meet them one day. And we chat all the time, and we have a Facebook Messenger group between the three of us. And so without doing that investigation, and it was a 25-year search, really, active search. And so to get the answer just changes your perspective on who you are, I've connected dots that I didn't have connected before.
Yeah, there were a few things that stood out to me when you first told me the story. And one was that, like a lot of adoptees, there was a decent gap in time between when you searched for your mother to your father, in that when you were quite young, you're always looking for your mother, and it wasn't until much later that you began to search for your father. But then also, once you found your mother, very quickly you found your father. So it was kind of both of those things. And then also how, reunion shows that we see on TV, that follow adoption stories, they kind of make reunion look like this culmination happening when you first meet. They might come back for a quick catch up like a month later to see how it goes. But these stories are ongoing for the rest of our lives, and there's connections and things that will keep happening until the day we die, and you're really at the cusp of yours.
Oh, I'm at the very start of the journey. Like, it's only just started. Of building those relationships, being vulnerable with new people, learning and understanding about their life and how it's unfolded, getting to know my birth father as much as I can, same with my birth mother's family, having that opportunity to meet with them. And I know that once I see people in the flesh, and have that mirroring of looking at people that look like me, smell like me, have similar, acne scars to me, that's just going to be, the next healing that will happen.
Yeah. It's almost like we spend the rest of our time like coloring in those outlines, isn't it? And putting some flesh to them. I don't know how to explain it properly, but
so it's if you use the coloring book analogy, like finding the answers of who the people are is the picture with the black outlines, and then every step forward that I take is just coloring in another bit of that picture that creates a full picture of who I actually am.
So I guess another part of reunion that's interesting, and we have to take a step back sometimes and do this, is we've been searching for ages, and then we found the person, then we've reached out. So we've had a lot of process time to lead up to it. And then we reach out and contact that person, their process time starts there. And so sometimes we can be a step ahead of them and they're still playing catch up. And we've got a saying at Jigsaw where we say that reunion needs to move at the pace of the slowest person. So I wondered, particularly with the pandemic and the international stuff and just the fact that everyone's playing catch up, how has that impacted your experience of reunion and the progression of it?
Yeah. So I think the pandemic and being on the opposite side of the world has given it a great cadence, because I haven't had to rush into anything, and neither has anyone on the other side of the world, you know. So we've all had a great amount of significant time to let it settle and think and decide where our boundaries are. And it has, where I have observed or listened to other stories where people just rush in and they don't get a chance to let their emotions process and settle and let things rise to the surface that you might not have thought were there.
It definitely has some positives, doesn't it? I remember when I was 19, I didn't really know how to think about boundaries, let alone put them up. And I remember things moved too fast for me, and I almost felt like I was in shock at the beginning, because I just was kind of automating through and just letting what everybody else's needs were sort of go above my own, because I hadn't figured out what my needs and desires were. And so things moved way too fast. So it is nice for you, I guess, in some ways, to have that stop of the international to slow things down and let everyone process.
And like, I've found myself imagining the reunion, but sometimes imagination also equals expectation. And so when I start imagining what the reunion might be like, I'm older enough and wise enough to go, oh, is that imagination an actual expectation that I'm placing on it? And so having that time to, because we all imagine what it's going to be like when you meet them, I think. I know I do. And so I've been sort of making sure I check myself to ensure that I'm dropping the expectations, because it's not fair on anyone, myself or them.
It can really make the disappointment, because you've got ideas that aren't rooted in reality, because you could never know what's going on in somebody else's life or their head.
100%.
So I guess my final question, or maybe my second to final question, my penultimate, is what have these new connections brought to your life? How are you feeling about them?
Well, they've been a gift. So they've brought closure to a lifelong question, which, you know, having an actual answer to a question that you have been asking for your entire life is amazing, regardless of whether you're an adoptee or not. And so with that closure, it sort of opened up a new part of myself to be, I don't have this constant search anymore. Like, now what am I going to do? You know?
I really get what you're saying.
What am I going to do now? What am I going to obsess over now in my spare time? And I haven't worked that out yet. I have not worked that out, but I am working on it. So it's left a gap, oddly, of finding out the answer, you know?
I really get that, because I have these, like, you know, shuffle of tarot cards, or I don't know what you call them. I'm a little bit spiritual, and I'm also very not, so I'm a bit weird, but they're ones where you like daily just shuffle them, and then one will pop out and you go, all right, that's going to tell me what I need to know today. And the one I pulled out just the other day was about the end of a really big thing in my life, and how I've got everything I needed out of that thing, and now it was time to turn a page and figure out what's next. And it's kind of how I feel about things. Like, adoption's lifelong, like it's going to be with me and changing forever. But I feel like I've got my page colored in, like the things I've been seeking for 51 years
Mhm.
I've found them. I've kind of finally got to that point where I go, yeah, I've got my colored in page, and yes,
Mhm.
emotional things are going to happen around it, but I kind of got it. And it really does feel like I've entered a new phase, which is a little bit disconcerting. If you're not a searcher, who are you?
Exactly. Well, if you're not a searcher, who are you? That is such a great question. Yeah.
Maybe that's our next episode. If you're not a
Maybe.
searcher, who are you?
It's a real thing, though.
It is, because it takes up so much of your life. Yeah.
So much of your like conscious life and your subconscious life, like both of those things, you know? Yeah. So I'm working that out. What is, and I've, since I've found my family, like I've made some, like I've resigned from a job that I was in for 11 years and I was completely happy in, to suddenly I was like, oh, I need a change. And so I uprooted from a job and started a new role. I've done a whole bunch of things to help figure that out.
And like a lot of adopted people, it sounds to me just from our quick talks that you are an overachiever. Like you work hard and you are constantly on the achievement thing, like, mastery and control is very important to adopted people generally, if I am allowed to generalize.
Control is one of my things, or the perception of control is, I think that's why I love project management, because it's all about managing risk and controls and planning and having a plan A and a plan B and a plan C.
DEF.
Which I've recently learned is actually can be quite healthy, because it's if that thinking, which is shows a lot of flexibility and agility in your mind. But for a long time, it was the search of control for me.
Doesn't it show a lot of resilience too, in that, something that was so dangerous to us when we were children, like being separated from mother. I can't imagine a more dangerous time in an infant's life as being separated from your mother, and so out of control that planning for the future and making sure things are okay would be very important to us from a basic DNA level. It would be built into us as a trauma response, that we make sure our lives have got a plan B, C, D if we can.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
what are your hopes?
An absolute T.
What are your hopes for the future now?
So I am hoping to possibly move on to a boat one day. I'd love to circumnavigate Australia via the water, continue traveling the globe. I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I love to touch, do, see, and eat, and continue to explore. And build a relationship with my siblings and hopefully meet my father one day. That would be exciting, and my aunties and my uncles, and live a healthy, happy life, and continue the conversation about adoptees, and open up the conversation that is probably going to happen for the new generation of IVF babies and or babies that are conceived through insemination. Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, so I call it insemination, but I know it's
donor conception.
Donor conception.
That's it. And surrogacy. I mean, that's something that's raising its head.
And just making sure that we're talking about it, like it's a real thing for people. And I know that I'm the person that I am because I was able to talk about it from the very beginning. And there's absolutely no shame in it. And I would love for every person to feel that, regardless of your how you were conceived,
I think you just did answer the question then. Who are you if you're not a searcher? You're going to be a circumnavigator and an explorer of life.
There we go. Yeah.
General. There you go. And I hope you keep in touch with me, Angela, and let you know how you go with everything. I'd love to hear more. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, because I know I've so much enjoyed talking to you and learning about your experience. And I know your story is going to help others too.
Oh, and thank you for all the amazing work that you do of bringing people to your podcast and letting them share your stories so others can hear them.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you to our listeners for joining us. And if you have a story that you'd like to share with us, and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, just like Angela, jump onto the main podcast page of the Jigsaw Queensland website and complete the prospective guest form that you'll find there. And just remember that Adopt Perspective can be listened to by people all over the world. And bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Adopt Perspective podcast. If you'd like to find out more, go to the podcast page on www.jigsawqueensland.com and you'll find a wealth of information and resources on the website. If you reside in Queensland, you can reach Jigsaw Queensland's Forced Adoption Support Service on toll-free 1800 210313, or you can call Jigsaw on 07 33 58 6666. If you live in another state of Australia, you can still call the Forced Adoption Support Service number and your call will be answered by the Forced Adoption Support Service in the state that you're calling from. In every other state, Relationships Australia operates this service. A big thank you to Matt Sparrow for composing and recording our original theme music. Until next time, I'm Jo Sparrow saying farewell from Adopt Perspective, a podcast for anyone affected by adoption.